W1 set Y. Go ahead, over.
Yeah, Echo 1 Victor 5, stroke, Germany 4, Victor, Zulu, Victor, Quebec.
It is super buggy here, but we are at Mount Wilson Observatory. This is actually the solar observatory here behind me. This is where Edwin Hubble literally discovered the universe. He saw Andromeda from, not this one, but the dome tower over here, which meant that we had a universe. Oh my gosh, I'm getting attacked.
Hille and Bernd Becker were German photographers who captured thousands of industrial buildings starting in the late 1950s in Western Europe and the United States. They were married to their art and they were married to each other since then. Among the buildings they focused their camera lens on were grain silos, iron ore mines, coke ovens, lime kilns, cooling towers, oil refineries, blast furnaces, factory facades, and water towers. They worked exclusively in industrial buildings, which were then exhibited in groups, either in a linear or grid format. Their massive project changed the place of photography in the art world, changed the way we view our modern landscape, and established a school of photography.
So why are we talking about Hille and Bernd Becker? The reason is because they used large format cameras in order to be able to create these very symmetrical perspectives of these architectural monuments. All the lines are very straight and the composition is extremely precise. If you notice on the top and the bottom, there's an extraordinary consistency across all of the frames, all of their images, all of their body of work, and we're talking decades and decades of work. And the way they were able to do that was on a large format camera, you have the rise and the fall and an ability to move the lens around physically in order to create the correct perspective. This is also accomplished in 35mm format or a smaller format with a tilt shift lens. When Viopol, who is an online retailer, reached out to me and said, would you like to try this new lens? Or it's not, I don't think it's super new, but I think there's a new version of it out from TTArtisan. It's the 50mm. I was like, yeah, absolutely. I would love to try that. Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's see if we can shoot this. Not perfect because I'm not wide enough to be able to get the whole thing. What I could do is just shift and keep shooting and just gamble to see if Photoshop can handle the merger of a shifted point of view, but AI is really good these days if you hadn't heard, so I'm gonna try. I could have just looked to the barrel of this camera to discover that this is not in fact a tilt shift lens. This is merely a tilt lens, which is arguably the harder of the two things to execute well. Shift is definitely more controlled. Tilt has a completely different complexity to it. I'm not really the person to explain how tilt works on a lens, so I'm gonna have this guy do it.
When you use a camera with a standard non-tilting lens, all of the photographic planes remain parallel. That is to say, the image plane, the lens plane, and the plane of focus are perfectly parallel. When you attach a tilt-shift lens and begin to tilt the lens off axis, something unusual begins to happen to the plane of focus.
Tilt is often used for the thing you might recognize the most is this very sort of early Instagram look, right? Where you get this miniature effect. And I did shoot some photos like that. I was in San Francisco and I stood at the Battery and shot down towards the bridge and was able to capture what I think are actually really cool, fun ways of looking at a very commonly viewed scene. It is a bit gimmicky for me, so I don't think I would use it that way very often, but it does lead to an effect that, if executed well, can serve your purposes if that's what you're looking to do. But the lens does bring me then to another artist of another time, Julia Margaret Cameron, who used large format in a very radical way at her time to capture these very dreamy, ethereal portraits of mostly women, but men as well, children, with this very sort of like tilted perspective. However, what I think is really common when you look at tilt photography is when you're shooting wide open at 1.4, which is the fastest this lens can go to, you see this very clear band of focus. That band of focus is kind of distracting. It works really well in certain circumstances. When you're dealing with graphical lines, it's perfect. So trees, when you're looking up vertically and you tilt the lens in the right way to line up the field or the plane of focus with the trees themselves, then you can create this really wonderful effect where the trees are super in focus and then everything else falls off very softly. And I do really enjoy that. However, for me, the most fun way to use this lens and the way that I would creatively like to lean into it and the way that I shot it the most frequently was just to go hard at the tilt thing. So rather than just getting this very, very singular plane of focus in a vertical line, whichever way you want on the focal plane, I further messed it up by adding textures and various items in front of the camera. I have to go get them. So this is where it can get really fun. So I would take the lens, tilt it, then move my perspective to match with or move my angle to 180 degrees so that I was getting a vertical alignment. And I would shoot it this way, and this is kind of heavy with the SL, which I was shooting this with. But I would take something like a prism, and wherever that field of focus was that was in focus but not on my subject, I would mess up the edges with a prism. You could also use, I have like a $5 kit that used to be used for a Polaroid camera that has all these various like plasticky effects. I even use things like tape, like you just take a little bit of tape and tape it to the edge. You could use a UV filter with a bit of Vaseline on the edge, not in the center, just on the edge where it would be sharp. I even just use my darn hand to create a little bit of a texture, a color, a light differentiation that would just make the edges of that plane of focus a little softer, a little dreamier. But that is the way I would use a shift lens like this. However, what really blew me away about this lens, and which I was not expecting, is just putting it back to 0 on all fronts, centering it, putting it at 0 degrees right where it started, and shooting this like a straight up 50mm 1.4 lens. Wow, it is sharp, wide open. It's a bigger lens than you would buy for a normal 50mm 1.4, but you are getting that added benefit. And this lens is like under $200, which is kind of mind-blowing. I was stunned by all of these photographs, which I shot almost entirely wide open at my friend's baby shower. It just delivered. I was really, really happy with them. I am not a pixel peeper, so I should really reinforce that. I don't care if there's a little distortion. I don't care if there's slight chromatic aberration. I don't care if the edges are soft. I'm not looking for corner to corner sharpness. I am more of a portrait photographer, an emotional photographer, an interpretive or impressionistic photographer. I'm not a landscape photographer. But I will say that when you stop it down, it sharpens up very nicely. So overall, my impressions of this lens were really favorable. It's very well built. It has this very nice gnarled sort of focus throw. It is declicked, so it works nicely for video, and people do like to use that tilt shift. I'm sorry, I keep saying shift. That tilt capability in video. Again, not really for me because it is very, it's a trick, right? It feels very tricky. But if you want to do a time lapse with that in video, it absolutely works. So definitely a great lens for the money. It's a super value in my opinion. Really happy with it. Had a great time shooting with it. If you go in the link down below, you can order yours. And yeah, until the next video, I will see you on Instagram.